I'm not sure if it matters, but wasn't Karl using that restoration of property hearing or the return of property hearing as compared to a writ of habeas corpus?
He was, but that's the root of my question: is why would it be limited to that? You know, when you're doing habeas corpus, you're still asking for a return of property. It just happens to be for property.
But if you ask for the property to show up.
Because I was looking at James Madison's definition of property, and he said it's your faculties from which all property originates. And the definition of faculty is your thoughts, you know, your reasoning. So, you know, everything emanates from that. Your tangible and intangible property emanates from your thoughts. So why wouldn't that include, like I have an order on me that I can't leave the state. So my locomotion is my property. I want my property returned to me. My reputation. They had newspapers carried a story about my arrest. Why wouldn't that be my property? You know, my innocence and my reputation. I don't see why it would be limited to just compared to habeas corpus.
Very good point.
Well, my understanding about property, there's, you know, you have to, I would assume, draw in the sand what are you considering your property, and being careful on what you consider your property, you know, because, see, the government is designed to protect you and your property. So if you claim, well, let me say this. It's hard to claim a vehicle, your property, when you didn't create that vehicle. You see, you purchase, even though you purchased it, it's hard to claim ownership. And I think that's where they get us in when they have us signing all these documents and everything else when we're trying to make a claim to something that we really can't claim because we're not the creator, you know, of that. That's just like claiming your birth certificate and your driver's license and making a claim to it, a claim of something that you didn't create. You're trying to claim it your property. Well, okay, now they got a good argument. How you going to claim your property when you look at it on the back of it, it says when we ask for our property, you got to return it back to us. So now you're in a jam for claiming something that's not yours. So, you know, but property as far as your kids, that's something that you did what? You created.
Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't create our abilities and our personal resources, but those are still, according to Madison, those are still our property, and according to the Bible, they're our property. You know, the Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, the Saving to Suitor Clause, says that all the rights we had before the Constitution are still our rights. So if the Bible says the earth and all that's in the earth is our dominion, man's dominion.
But I agree with you. But what did we do? We signed it over, okay? And you are right. It was ours, but we agreed and we contracted and we signed it over. When we did the birth certificate, we did the Social Security, and when we signed in a vehicle, when we signed in a vehicle for registration, we're signing it over. Well, yes, you're right. It is yours.
Hey, Larry.
Uh-huh.
You got a good point, but you know what? All that is being done by fraud. That birth certificate, that Social Security, all this property, they're stealing all of man's property through way of fraud.
I agree with you, Mike. I mean, is it Mike?
No, it's Mark.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that fraud.
Mark, I agree with you saying in some sense because it wasn't fully disclosed, but the key is...
Right. That's the only reason...
But the key is you consented to it and you still sign it over. Now, the key is what you're going to do. You're going to revoke and rescind your contract and your signature? Yes, you can do that. But the truth of the matter of is still stuff that we agreed to do to give away stuff that we was inherited. We gave it all up by consenting to it.
Right, and see, the only reason why I'm saying that I use the word fraud because, yeah, it was done through consent, through a contract, but with non-disclosure. So technically,
why do you think they need disclosure? Why does everybody think they need disclosure? They're beneficiaries. They're not entitled to disclosure. The birth certificate was created for your benefit. You're a beneficiary. They don't have to disclose anything to a beneficiary ever. You chose the benefit. You chose to bind yourself to the rules of that benefit.
But the problem comes up. But the problem comes up is how did we do that when they didn't? They compelled. They forced the parents at the hospital level to fill out the certificate. They didn't force. There was no gun. There was no knife. There was. It's a benefit. People got to realize that. It's created for your benefit. It wasn't created to harm you, and it cannot harm you. When you sign your name to stupid contracts, then you harm yourself through your signature.
But let me say this: both of y'all are right for the simple fact that, and think about what you're saying when. I agree with you, Mark, when you're saying you signed something that they force you. Now, what you mean by forces? Now, grant you didn't have a gun. They didn't use guns, but they force you in the means of if you don't sign this, you won't see your kid no more. Same thing Karl went through. Same thing several other people went through. That at birth, when you sit there and you have a kid and you do not sign that paperwork, okay, now. It's a force because they, for whatever reason, they take your kids and you won't see your child again because you didn't sign that birth certificate. In other words, you didn't take that certificate. They will force it on you. So it's a matter of force. It's just not with the gun. It's just not with the gun and the badge and all that. But it's a force because just like Karl went through, I just talked to a person the other day. They took her kid at birth. I think the young lady was on the show last week. They took her kid because she didn't want to sign the birth certificate. So they will force that on you, or they have been forcing it on you when you don't want to consent.
Okay, but listen, though. The birth certificate doesn't do anything wrong. It's when you consent. It's when you consent to signing a stupid contract. That's where the problem starts.
But see, you are the birth certificate. By not agreeing to the birth certificate, you know what you're doing? You're giving the state permission to have ward over you when you don't sign that birth certificate.
Okay.
When you don't acknowledge that you're not acknowledging that I'm giving you rights for this birth certificate, that I'm signing this birth certificate. So the state has jurisdiction over you at that point in time.
No. They have some jurisdiction over the person. But my point is
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. A person they have jurisdiction over that person that was just born.
Yes, but that's just a name. It's just a person. It's a corporation. That's the difference. Separate the man from the person. But totally right. Even beyond all that, though, let's just say there was no threat or coercion, and my parents signed, and I had a person created for my benefit. Then in the mail, I get a birth certificate. Maybe my parents will apply for a social security number for me. That's fine too. So my birth certificate and my social insurance number cards both sit in the top drawer, or they sit in the vault down at the bank in a safety deposit box, wherever. They cause no harm to anyone at any point ever.
You're right.
If I choose to sign an IRS form, I've done it to myself.
You're right.
It's got nothing to do with the birth certificate until you sign something giving consent. That's where the trouble starts.
Now, let me ask you this. To go in and out of the 2 or 3 dimensions, don't you think you're going to have to sign something at some point in time to at least be able to work into both dimensions because of the fact that you got to survive. You got to be able to move around. So you're going to have to sign and consent to something at some form or another.
Oh, hey, Larry, hold on. I got something even better. Hold on a second. Hold on. As far as the birth certificate, they create a title for you. They create a legal person. And how is it supposed to be? Hold on. Just let me finish this real quick. They create this legal person for you, for your benefit, supposedly. But then again, you take you as a man, you take all of your property and they put it in that title's name, and now the state owns all your property. So how's that beneficial?
Who said that? Who told you that?
Okay, hold on. You guys sound like some 2 a.m. guru, talk shoe. All right, just get off the birth certificate altogether and the contracts and everything else. You know as well as I do, the government exists for the protection of your property, to secure your property, for the preservation of property. That's it. So everything that the government was created to do boils down to that one single solitary thing. So regardless of how you engage with your government, with the corporation, with the bank or anybody else, it is always for your benefit. And if for some reason you're not receiving a benefit, then there was a misunderstanding and you have the right to correct it. And that's really what it comes down to. So getting into, the birth certificate does this and the birth certificate does that is absolutely unnecessary. Same with the IRS. If there's a benefit, great. If there isn't, then you walk away. And it's the same thing with any corporation you're going to deal with. The IRS tells the bank that they need your money because you didn't do a particular thing. Well, somewhere in the fine print of the bank contract, they might say, well, you agreed to that, but you know what? You didn't. You didn't agree to that. Show me where it says specifically that I'm giving you authorization to give my property to a third party. Because there's no benefit there. And so you got to go back to the Declaration of Independence. Men are endowed with certain unalienable rights by their Creator, and life, liberty, and property, pursue their happiness. And to this end, governments are instituted among men with their consent. And that's it. There is no other purpose to government. So let's move on.
That's a darn good point there, Gus. That's a darn good point about property. And I think you couldn't have said it any better, because that's exactly what it, I agree with that. That's exactly what it all boils down to. The government is created to protect man and his property, which I had stated earlier. So,
Larry, let me add to what Gus said, because I think this is pretty important. Madison, who's considered probably the most major contributor to the Constitution, wrote in Federalist Paper number 10 the simple sentence that said, the diversity in the faculties of men from which the rights of property originate is not less an insuperable obstacle to uniformity of interest. The protection of these faculties is the first object of government. So in other words, the protection of the original source of property is government's first objective, which is your faculty. The definition of faculty is your ability, your means, your resources. So that's it. What Gus said is exactly right, and there's an authoritative site for it.
Yeah. All right then. I'm glad we all came to an agreement on that. To a certain point, for those that don't agree, well, I guess you can get on a Gus show, and Gus will break it down for you on why it's like that, and why property is the way it is, and the way it's the means that it has. So if anybody else got a question, we can go to the next question. Or anyone else have another issue, we can go to the next issue, because I think we're moving right along.
Larry, did we conclude that, at least for now, that the return of property hearing is probably a viable means for other types of property other than compared to habeas corpus?
I would say it's one good means. What do you say about that, Gus? Leave yourself back in, Gus. I guess Gus has stepped away. But, what about you, Mark? You think that's one viable means?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if you can have that hearing to restore a property, anything can be your property. So whether it's your kids, whether it's your car, whether it's whatever it is, an acorn that fell on your land, if somebody took it. I think property it's basically covers a lot of territory. So if you can have it for one thing, I believe that you can have it for another. What do you think, Mike?
I would like to ask one question, and I'd like to find out if there's something that anybody considers to be something other than property. Because I can't think of anything that's not property.
I agree with you, 100%.
Yeah. Well, anything that belongs to the public can't be property.
Well, obviously, it's either held in common or you have done something to initiate a property in that thing.
Right, either it's private or public, basically.
But if you're talking about your stuff in any way whatsoever, it's property. Whether it's your hair, your ideas, your energy, your creativity,
dreams, your hopes, anything, right?
It's always property. When you're talking about the IRS, you're talking about property. When you're talking about any dealings like this guy earlier with Buddy, his friend or himself, which I believe he was at, you're always talking about property. You're never talking about anything besides property. So it's either property in common, which means it belongs to everyone, or it's property specific to a particular man or woman, and that's it. Government can't own property.
What if my neighbor and we split on a bicycle? I pay half, he pays half. We buy a bike.
I got an answer for that, Mike. I got an answer for that. If you look up the definition of property in etymology, etymonline.com, it gives you tangible and intangible words. So you've got nature, quality, possession, thing owned. But here's a key word. Peculiarity.
Yeah.
So peculiarity would mean something that's unique to you, not shared. And then the last phrase in the definition is proprius. In other words, one's own special. So that's property, like Kyle's always saying, what's exclusive to you.
So it can't be exclusive to you, it's shared.
Some other good words to look up to really get a good peripheral understanding of property is the word possession and self-possession. Self-possession with a hyphen is actually a word, and it refers to command of one's emotions. So your emotions are your property. Because remember, the definition of property is possession. So self-possession is a subset of that. So your emotions, your feeling of safety and security and peace and happiness, which all know the Constitution talks about. But the possession isn't just possessing, it's the fact of possessing. It's an occupation. What do you occupy? Your space, your rights. So it's pretty broad. That's the point I'm trying to make. Property is a very broad term with the caveat that it's peculiar. It's peculiar to you. It's special to you. One's own.
Well, see, another way of looking at it is my daughter is my property, and my relationship to her is my property. But on the other side of the coin, my ex-wife also can claim my daughter as property and her relationship to her daughter as property.
But she can't claim your relationship to your daughter.
Right.
It's your unique property. She's got her property that's called relationship, and you've got your property that's called relationship.
Yes.
That's a key distinction that you'll be able to use, by the way.
Yes, and there's other ways of looking at it too. Like my daughter calls me her daddy, so I become property to my daughter.
Right.
So there's other ways of looking at it too. Property is very interesting when you start thinking about it.